Go. You're live. Brett, welcome to TerraFlow. Sorry. You were going to start us.
I'm sorry. Mike is the biggest dick that I know. He literally said I get to start today, and he jumps in and sidewides me. Like,
Sidewives you.
Mike.
Listen, I've got nothing to do with your wife here.
Listen
So
to
I
this.
didn't sidewife
Click,
you.
click, 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 click. Okay? There we go. That's me pausing in the editing. Welcome, everybody, to the WTF moment. I'm really excited about today's show because we have muted Mike for good, and we've got a fabulous guest speaker who's internationally renowned and has really helped businesses all over the world reshape how they think about their purpose and drive into this new era. And we thought it was apt to get Colin Iles on the show with us to talk about the impact of COVID-19.
Colin,
and the best part about this is
Colin,
I don't have to listen to Mike anymore.
Colin, will you change your background so there's smoke blowing up there? Because Brett's blowing so much smoke up your ass there. Seriously. Brett, yes.
I just think Brett's been taken over. This is clearly not Brett. There's some sort of bot that's working here. This AI is very clever, hey? I mean, it looks just like you.
It's very clever.
It is.
I've got Print and Commun to thank for developing this. Note how much thinner it's made me.
I was going to say they've actually made you a bit fatter, but anyway.
Such a dick.
Such a dick. But anyway, today we're talking about the impact of COVID. Has it accelerated change or has it disrupted the disruption? And I think this is a really important point because before we all had COVID, we weren't sure what was actually happening, going on in the world. We made plans around this disruption. All those plans now are immaterial. So, Colin, what are your thoughts? Sorry, that was really bad. I ran out of steam there, Brett.
There was a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, there was a question there. I'm just going to throw the hot potato over the fence here. So, yeah. But sorry,
Shall we
Colin.
start with the easy part then? Brett, I thought you said you're going to mute him. Right, let's start with the easy part, or at least I think the easier part is COVID-19 accelerating the existing change and the existing disruption, and jumping to the end, absolutely. There can't be any question about it. And look, it's really difficult predicting any futures at the best of times. It's a fool's errand, but this just the pace that we have and what's actually happening out there, I just don't see it stopping. But let's just go back a step and just think what was happening pre-December 2019. Okay, and I like this terminology that Salim uses from who's the author of Exponential Organisations. He says we are living through a time where there are multiple Gutenberg moments that are happening.
Yes.
And what he meant by that is, if you think back to the printing press and what that did for the dissemination of information globally and how impactful that was, to have 20 or 30 at this moment in time, all working kind of in tandem and supporting and being additive to each other, is just absolutely incredible. And although sometimes we didn't notice it, it's just, where do you start to go and look at it? Think about, let's just go through a couple. Virtual reality, which is now progressing into this augmented reality, where you can imagine going into shops and, you don't even do that. You do it at home. You're trying on your gloves and putting them in wearing your glasses, and you're seeing how that clothing actually looks. Or using VR and tectonic touch to start to do medical procedures remotely, or robotics and what they're starting to do in the mines. Obviously, a lot of people on this call will have probably watched some of those great videos from companies like Boston Robotics. Then you've got this whole array of AI in every single sphere, allowing computer processing and compute to go and make, I suppose, many of those standard tasks and procedures that we do become completely irrelevant. So whether it's what you're experiencing when you use Google on search, or when you're going and thinking about, bring it into the legal system so that you can actually start to go and remove the need for experts in that field, because you can go and analyze every single legal case globally and have something that comes out of the back of it translated and informative, which you can go and use. I mean, the list is sort of endless. 5G that's coming on, cloud computing,
Yeah.
Okay, making data costs come down to zero. Energy costs starting to look like you can predict they'll come down to roughly zero at some point, because everything's moving towards either wind or sun-based, photovoltaic on people's roofs, moving away from fossil fuels. So it doesn't matter where you look. That last decade has just seen incredible progress, and that's 1.0. And you can just look at the next 2 decades that are coming and imagine how many things are going to be massively impacted as all of these technologies support each other, because it really is democratization. People getting access to information for prices which are tending towards free, with energy and cloud allowing compute and processing. We haven't mentioned quantum computing, just changing the whole landscape. And so my view is, with COVID-19, this is accelerating, I think, every single one of the impacts of those technologies that I've just mentioned.
So I'd like to dig into that a bit, because I don't think it's necessarily, personally, I don't think it's necessarily accelerating the progress of the technology. I actually think it's accelerating the marketplace for the technology.
Yes.
So, businesses who have always said, I'll do it just now, I'll do it later, we've got a transformation program, we'll put it through an 18-month procurement program. Mindset's still there. They've just been watching this world pass them by. And I agree. So I think that, for me, that it feels like the marketplace is going, oh, fuck.
100%. 100%. I mean, if you think about it, for the marketplace to exist, you need a behavioral change. And so although there's been many things, let's just take a simple one, working from home, right? We've been able to do that for a decade. The technology's been there, There's been plenty of Zoom and, all of the, what are we on at the moment? Skype, those platforms have been there for years and years and years. We've had the ability to go and manage tasks amongst each other in project teams, working from home and working remotely for many years now. But companies haven't felt the need to go and progress it. They've said, we've still got this iconic building that is our identity in this city, and we're really proud of the office space that we've got, and we've managed to go and get all the furniture set up properly. And people have to commute, and it's a real hassle. It's a pain in your ass. But it works because everyone does it, right? Along comes COVID-19. Suddenly everyone's becoming an expert in working from home. And companies are now looking at this in I can't say a positive way, a very realistic way, and say, this is doable. Okay? Google, Facebook, many of the big tech firms are already saying they don't plan to force people to come back into the office ever. We expect people to be predominantly working remotely until at least 2021. And so this monumental shift in behaviors that has been caused is now opening up a massive workspace for technology and for other aspects of what you might need to go and remote work. And so you need that crisis for these shifts to happen.
I agree. I think actually
you're quite right. Technology isn't necessarily being developed faster.
Yeah, there's a constraint in technology. I agree with the multiple tsunamis is kind of accelerating that, but the adoption is there. I quite like your thinking around it. It's a work from anywhere approach to our economic kind of ability. And I'm just thinking the most hard hit industry must be tourism. But it's probably going to be one of the industries that's going to come out fairly strong here, because all of a sudden you can work from anywhere. I mean, we're looking at our leave policies, we're looking at our time flexibilities. We've always been flexible as a business, and we've always had really good leave policies, and we like to balance lifestyle really well. But there's this big movement that's saying that you can pick your own time when to take advantage of leave, and which also means you can pick where you're going to be working. And I'm kind of picturing this global tourism industry. You'll probably go away to somewhere for a couple of months and maybe only take holiday for a week.
Yeah, look, I mean,
work anyway.
I think
it's going to be really interesting.
There's a couple of things in there which I find are fascinating. So you mentioned the leave policy. So the way the operating system of organizations, and we maybe come back to them, is going to have to change, right? No matter how you see it, it's going to have to change. And you take one example there is leave policy. Most organizations insist that you have a leave policy. But you go back and go, why? Why do you need a leave policy? You should be asking your staff to work, to produce, to do something useful. Whether they take a day or a year, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but we're so used to having this leave policy, sign in. Maybe it's from manufacturing days when you know, in some of the industries that still have that approach where you have to clock in and you're on the factory floor and you leave. Nowadays, what's all that about? Now, this isn't new. This isn't something, some might be going, oh, my company could never go to a no leave policy and just trust their people. Rubbish. Netflix have been running no leave policy since they formed. Okay, they're one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing stock on the S&P 500 over the last decade. Okay, the point is that their view is we've got to find a way to encourage people to be productive. Let's not worry about leave. And if you're working remotely, leave just becomes completely irrelevant. It shouldn't matter whether I'm doing 2 hours a day. You pay me for my 2 hours or for the productivity benefit that you're getting from it. That's the marketplace. Not whether it took me 5 days or 2 days or 3 weeks. If I'm able to do something which benefits the organization, that's what you should be considering. Whether I do, I want to go off for 3 months at a time, as long as I can manage it, okay, and if I can't, you're not going to pay me, you should start to go and trust me. So I think things like that are going to change. And then that opens up your second point about this whole idea of travel and hospitality. So let's take Airbnb. What's going to happen? I'm sitting here chatting to you guys, we're all on our homes. I'm going to get bored of this. I'm already bored of this after almost 90 days.
I thought you were talking about this conversation.
No. I'd like to go and work in, Cape Town or Timbuktu or Taiwan. It doesn't matter, okay? And there's going to have to be a new type of support for that. You go into these big hotels, they're only just getting their internet sorted so we can go and work remotely, and it's ridiculously expensive. My first booking choice has got to be super fast and super stable internet. And it's got to be free. Yeah. Okay, coffee shops have been starting to get on that as well. You've seen the sort of little business coffee shop combinations coming along for the last 5 or 6 years. So we can expect parts of tourism to change, or the hospitality industry changing radically, because what we want outside of our homes is changing quite radically as well. And then how do we get? Is it going to be lots of short hops? So the airline industry is going to have to change, because there's really nothing supporting that kind of under 500 kilometer market. So that might have to change, because we want a lot of these shorter hops. So there's so many consequences and knock-ons if these behaviors that we're learning because of COVID-19 stick, and if large organizations start to really go and push their workforce to give them other options.
Cool. I was raising my finger for Brett, not you, Colin, because I wanted to ask you a question, because what's the flip side of this? This is about how we work. So we're talking about the behaviors of how we work. How is the way we consume changing? Because that's ultimately what's going to drive the new business model, not the way we work, but the way that demand drives the customer experience.
Look, I suppose, in the answer to me has already been there. There's only so many ways we consume. It depends on the industries and the markets, but virtually everything that I'm consuming at the moment is a freemium model, right? Where your barriers to entry to go and use that product or service, let's take Zoom, are being taken down to zero, because online it is so competitive. So for anyone that wants to use Skype or Zoom, it's free.
Yeah.
But if you want to do something on Zoom that's beyond 40 minutes, you start to pay the premium.
For sure.
If you want to go and listen to Spotify, it's free. But if you want more functionality to go with it, it's $10 a month.
But here's the point though, Colin. Sorry to interrupt you. That model's been around, so this is neither a disruption nor a change. But when we look at our behavior, our consumption patterns, because, certainly I look at it. Suddenly the type of foods that we've been eating over the last 2 months, our atypical consumption has changed. Yeah. And for me, that's what drives the economy, is consumption, not supply.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've had big changes in consumption, obviously. So everyone in South Africa will appreciate this. Clearly buying yeast has been particularly difficult over the last couple of months, as everyone starts to try to self-brew their own alcohol. But similarly, you've had big shifts in the purchases of things like eggs and potatoes.
Yeah.
This is something picked up in the UK because you've moved away from not necessarily being less demand for it, maybe there is, but huge shifts because industries that previously, supplied restaurants and supermarkets, which no one's, or particularly restaurants in this example, is now having to try to swap over to go and support the demand that's coming through from supermarkets. And on top of that, people are actually making less food with starch in it, so the demand for potatoes has gone down. So you've got big shifts in the types of consumptions as we're going through this, which will be fascinating to see if they change. But for the operators, they're having to change as well. So, for example, if you're in anything, whether it's supermarkets or restaurants, subscription models are starting to become a thing where, we're saying, just like on Zoom with my, $20 or $30 a month, I'd be quite happy to put out, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,500 rand a month, whatever the monthly budget is. Geez, that's not going to buy much actually, is it? But you know where I'm going. So more like 10, 15,000. But there's a subscription model, and eat all I can. Give me my basket. I don't want to have to worry about, price choices. I just want regular deliveries that are starting to use AI to understand my behaviors over time. So I've got this nice premium subscription model, which makes it super easy to go and get my produce. And if you pay extra, you can have it within an hour or within 15 minutes. And if you pay for another add-on, you can have it par-cooked or pre-cooked, so you've just got to go and finish it off, not start from the basics. So there are so many opportunities here for industry.
Yes.
Sorry?
That boy says, eat as much as you can per month. Yes.
So I think there's so many opportunities here. I was seeing over in New York, you've got Michelin restaurants, owners of Michelin restaurants who have now set up food kitchens, where they've got 5,000 meals being produced today for free, trying to find models to do the right thing to support people that need those types of foods, but also using it to go and develop new ideas about how to turn it into the next kind of business model. So if you sit there and you think it's going to mean revert back to where it was, I think you're making a really dangerous decision. Okay? And it may do it. It certainly is going to mean revert. I think a lot of people who think it's going to go so far side are wrong. There will be a tendency for us to go out and do some of the things that we're used to doing. But you're going to see a whole 10, 15%, those first adopters saying, I want this. There's a new space that's been opened and they're willing to grab it because they've experienced it. They can imagine it. They feel it. They want it. The companies that don't see that and put the innovation spend in to try to go and try these new possibilities, they are not going to be the successful ones over the next decade.
Totally. So the next question on this then is really this idea that COVID is a black swan is not necessarily true, because we actually could see it. And certainly if you looked at China and you understood the idea of exponentialism and the virality of this, you could have prepared it. And I've certainly heard cases where it has, some companies were prepared and other companies were not so prepared. Just in terms of managing this chaos of change, understanding whether this is a black swan or not, what's your thinking about this? Because this really is what drives the process, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. But I think you've got to look at it more broadly, and you say, this was quite easy, I suppose. It was quite predictable. Many people have predicted. Obviously, most people have now, 18, 20 million views of Bill Gates with his TED talk in 2015. So. And he is one of many. 1918, there's the Spanish flu, and we've had SARS. So to not believe that at some point there was going to be a viral contagion that it becomes a pandemic, I think is just absolutely daft. Similarly, to go and believe that this would be, or to cocoon ourselves and assume we're going to cure it instantly is equally daft. As this has come through, we know so little. We can see from the impact of trying to develop a virus. Tell me if I'm wrong. Give me the flu, virus vaccine that is permanent and solves. So we know that it's going to happen again at some point. But it's more than just this. It's multiple black swans, that are out there.
Yeah.
Governments, revolutions, wars, volcanoes, impacts from things like global warming. We do not live on a stable planet. And therefore, things that we haven't seen in our lifetime or for the last couple of decades are going to pop up all of the time. And so you have to try as best you can to prepare for it. And I don't think just having insurance for your organization is an appropriate defense. You've got to try to go and get yourself into that nimble, adaptive approach where you don't know what's coming, but you're hedging yourself because you're putting bets out there to try to cover scenarios which are low probability, high risk, real option portfolio type events. And if you can put reasonably small chunks of change on an overall percentage to invest into these ideas on the fringes, like you should be doing if you're investing in a normal stock portfolio, to go and have some of those bets that probably don't pay off but could pay substantially, like a venture capital fund runs, for example, you're in a much better position to go and run through these disruptions as and when they occur.
No, totally. And it is interesting because, we can't see what it is, but I can guarantee you, and in fact, I think it's true. Apple have now moved a large portion of their production across to India. They're redefining their supply chain because clearly the fragility of the supply chain dependent on China is not a wise thing, because suddenly this happens and then China falls down and your supply chain falls down.
No, I think the difficulty with this for leadership, and for particularly leadership that are beholden to shareholders, is that it's really easy to crunch the numbers of the history and the next couple of months. So you can sit there and you can look at your balance sheet and your P&L and you can say there is absolutely no cost benefit for us to go and have a duplicate production factory in a different country. We're going to go and take the mass benefits, for the last 2 decades, 3 decades of outsourcing to a low-cost production area, because that is going to make a noticeable benefit for P&L and margin. It's quite difficult to go and put a risk-based observation and say, but we need to hedge that, because if something goes wrong, this could be business destroying. So another example is hindsight 2020. This one's a bit more difficult to go and manage. Look at what's happened on the airlines, right? Particularly the US airlines. They've been doing share buybacks and paying out dividends to an extent where they've had no capital reserve to survive a shock like this without government support, funding, and massive stimulation. That's criminal. Because again, you go back to it, the likelihood of having an event which closes down airline travel for a substantial amount of time should mean that you're at the very least having buffers in reserve in the same way that banks were forced to after 2008. But that's the crux of it. Banks wouldn't have the capital to get through this particular tsunami if it wasn't for the crisis in 2008. And other organizations that perhaps are less regulated or regulated in different ways don't have that natural foresight on that investor share capital structure to put aside the significant capital they receive. One company that's done the complete reserve that is in just a wonderful position is Apple, with their hundreds of billions of cash reserves, which people are going, no, we need to go and pay it out to the shareholders and what have you, which they've very cleverly held on to, puts them in a massively beneficial position.
Yeah, absolutely.
So companies that don't hedge for these black swan events are, I think, are really making big mistakes. But unfortunately, that's the majority.
Totally. So you made a point there, Brett?
No, I was just saying all the big Silicon Valley businesses have those massive cash reserves. And then they're all looking at it and they're going, well, we're not going to pay it out to the shareholders as dividends. And I quite like that. I just look at our own business that Mike and I ran, and our initial target was to build a runway of 3 months. And then as we started seeing this COVID, we just fortunately got a couple of things right through timing. We managed to build a runway of 9 months. Now we're living through it and we're going, 9 months is not enough. We need to be thinking a minimum of a year to a year and a half. And that also starts putting an interesting kind of swing on business and how you use that capital and how you fund. Because all of a sudden you're sitting with a year's worth of operating capital that is banked that maybe you could be using to innovate, but maybe you could be leveraging it. So I started looking at this, and we're going to start seeing this surplus of cash reserves that are not being tapped, that might slow down the change of COVID, because people are all going to want to be able to survive. So that might also be a slowdown rather than just seeing the acceleration. And then I kind of look at it and I go, well, it's also going to have an acceleration maybe later on. So maybe we're seeing a burst now, we'll see a lull, and then I think we're going to see this huge uptake in about a year and a half, because you're going to be sitting on these cash reserves and you're able to leverage that in a massive way.
Forbes have just produced a recent article. I picked up on it. It was shared by colleagues of mine on the OpenEXO community. But it was fascinating, because what it's basically highlighting is that post-2008 and this decade or so since, the top performing companies, particularly measured by your sort of compound annual growth rate on your share price, have all have been the ones that put significant investments in pivoting research and development and innovation. The ones, so, if you think about it, when you're going through a depression, a recession, or a moment like this, whereas the majority are thinking survival, bordering up, stopping everything that is considered to be discretionary spend, the firms that are now way ahead of the competition in the following decade tend to be the ones that have said, look, we're going to start putting huge amounts of money because we need to pivot and we've got to go and start to go and do our next innovation cycles. And I think it's not counterintuitive. What I find counterintuitive is that when you're in these downturns, like why people pull back from marketing and they pull back from investment. And I look at it and go, this is the ideal time to be investing, snapping up cheap, complementary companies or even competitors so that you're getting ahead. This is the time to be going and do that because, history shows this, unless something just remarkable happens in the next couple of years, which has never happened ever, we will recover, right? Businesses will grow, markets will grow, profits will come back. And this is the ideal down part to go on that sort of buying spree, whether it's capital, people, resources, IP, whatever.
Just an interesting or a question on this, and I don't want to turn this into a political conversation in any shape or form.
But you're about to start.
I wanted to, obviously we're seeing what's happening around the world in terms of the rioting and what have you. So it's something different, the rights and the wrongs of it, etc. I mean, this has never happened before. This. I mean, certainly you'll remember when what was it? The Wall Street movement kicked in after the 2008 collapse. We never saw this kind of destructive, almost anarchy that's happening in the world today.
We've seen that lots of times. You had the Arab Spring, and you've had the Hong Kong disruption over the last couple of years, and we've had obviously, South Africa's got plenty of examples where these things have happened. Perhaps the only real difference on this one is that this has gone viral globally.
It has got, but this is my point because you know what the old expression is when America sneezes, the world kind of feels the aftershock. And America's not sneezing; it's coughing. It's almost choking at the moment. I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on the impact from a recovery point of view, and just there's something different going on in the world now than what's happened before.
So anthropologists and behavioral scientists and historians and a whole bunch of other skill sets are going to have better answers on this. But what I will say is this is another of several factors that are sort of, I don't know about complicating, but what I hope comes out of the back of it is that there's an opportunity here to go and really reset the dial, because we haven't mentioned one of the really devastating consequences of COVID-19, aside from the deaths that are occurring from it, is going to be that Gini coefficient, I believe, just gets even wider, because clearly those who are reliant on income to survive are just being decimated. Companies that are basically, reliant on day-to-day income to survive, they're just being, decimated. And so therefore you tend to see that the lower income category industries and workforce are going to be much more impacted, than the sort of tech-savvy, high-level bankers that are sitting there and just sort of riding over this. Those who've got wealth and capital assets are going to get through this without any particular problem. Those who are dependent on income are in all sorts of trouble. And so whether it's getting rid of sexism or racism or ageism or any of the other inequalities that exist because of the structure, or those really absurd mechanisms that really are coming through now about how investors invest in companies, so you end up in this continual system where there's this minority of people that win and the majority slowly start to fail and be left behind. I really hope that this is an opportunity to go and look at a reset. And I think one of the examples I'm excited about is this idea of this universal basic income. So although it's not something which is necessarily achievable in South Africa, maybe it is, at least we've got some evidence in years to come with the UK and the US putting billions, right, into going and supporting people who have been laid off or put into furlough. And I'm going to be fascinated because, over the next decade, we can imagine that this is exactly the sort of mechanism that's going to have to be introduced because of the impact of robotics and AI and other technologies, which are making some of the more manual and repetitive tasks that we carry out as humans automatable.
Yeah.
By the way, that's just in the low income. That's also across multiple ranges. That applies equally to doctors as it does to miners.
No, totally, and I agree with you. And I mean, Brett and I have been speaking about this UBI since we started podcasting in 2016, literally, because of this exact problem. And I agree. It will be fascinating to see, because we've crossed a bridge. Up until now, there's been a lot of talk. Now it's forcing action. So it'll be very, very interesting to see, and it's a difficult one, because and all of the research does show in the UBI case studies that it does uplift society as a whole, and people are driven by meaning and purpose as opposed to monetary gains. And people need to do stuff. They need to connect. They need to add value. And when you've taken away the pain, it's easy to add the value. When there's tremendous pain and suffering, it's very difficult to add the value to not only yourself, but other human beings around you. So I do agree. And it does excite me, because it does change, I think, one of the most critical parts of our societal problem. And that really is the banking system and how money is actually created and distributed, and this monopoly that the banking sector has on effective, because I mean, all money is collateral debt. That's all it actually is. Are we getting comments here? I like this. Can you?
While you're looking at the comments, I just want to give one example. This is a fantasy of mine. It's a hope. But if you think about one of the core reasons why racism exists today, just excluding the history, this has nothing to do with even black or white. This is just the way we are as humans. We network and bond with certain clusters and groupings of people. All right, since the year dot, I think it's just innate in humans, and I guess we always will. Corporates and companies exacerbate that, because if you think that network effect, your number one power play to get to the top, to become the CEO, or is you need technical knowledge and you need some training and that sort of stuff. It's your network.
Yeah.
Right. Your ability to network, to go and get mentors and supporters, because they're going to be the ones who are emotionally promoting you. Yes, there's going to be a whole review system, and they're going to try to go and put it into some framework. Let's be honest about it. That framework is backfilling the emotions that are driven by the managers that want. And then you've gone up a level and you've learned that system, and you do the same. So you're looking for your trusted network, and trust comes in. And so for no reason, you start trusting, and you've got this bias where, historically it's kind of, I suppose people like us on this call, sort of middle to elderly white males who are starting that network effect, which then precludes really anyone from having the same advantages to go and to get through that particular system. So you've got to find a way to change that. If we want to go and get equality across all aspects, we're to change that. And I've got one hope. I hope, because there's a pro and a con from working from home and doing things remotely. Those networks are powerful for building the relationships to be productive in organizations. When you're a newbie and you walk into an organization and you know nobody, you are never going to go and be promoted or get everything. You need time in there to build the relationships, to go and have the network for you to start getting good jobs, interesting work, and to proceed. And so locality, going into the city and commuting, you get that big advantage from building those relationships. I'm hoping we find a new way. Now we're going a bit more remote, because we can't do that anymore. We're fine. We know each other. We've known each other for years, and we can have this conversation. Fourth person comes along, they don't know us. How do they get into our circle?
No.
Now, if it's an office, you get in because you're in the office. I want to see what happens as we go remote.
Yes.
And maybe it opens up opportunities for those networks to be a lot less prejudiced against, the sort of normal, heuristics and bias that we've got.
No, absolutely. It opens up the randomness of the moment, which is incredibly powerful. Sorry, Brett, I talked over you there.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's actually just where I think it's actually going to go is going to be around productivity and value. So,
I hope so.
I think we've always wanted that in these networks. But the problem with these networks, you form, there's a lot of deadwood that starts being established, and people, feel that they don't have to add value because they have a relationship. And I agree with you. I think as we get into this world, we can deconnect some of those networks and reestablish them at maybe a bigger scale. So that's exciting. It's no
It is.
longer.
Well, another really fascinating thing, which I hope comes to the fore, is purpose, because you mentioned that earlier, Mike. If you're in an office, again, purpose, I think you can get away without having it, because you kind of got peer pressure. You turn up, you've got to be productive. You go home, maybe you're surfing Facebook or something when they started to get relaxed. But in general, you're there and you're present, and there's pressure. Now you're at home. You've got to find a new mechanism, which isn't just monetary and kind of, if you don't pull up your socks, then you're out of here. You can use those levers, those negative levers, if you want, but you've got to find a deeper purpose if you want to motivate a remote workforce.
No, absolutely.
And I think if you start get that in, that really opens up an opportunity to accelerate change in a very positive way about how organizations reboot their operating systems.
No, I quite agree. And I mean, certainly from our personal perspective, in terms of what's going on in the world, without purpose, we become very misguided. And especially in today's world, if you want me to see the world differently, you need to help me understand the world differently. And purpose does that. It gives some sense of deeper understanding and connection to our world. Because there's too many dictators in the world telling us how we need to do things, especially in the office environment. You do it because I'm the boss. But if you can turn that purpose around, 100% agree. I just want to answer Rob's question here. He's asked, can you comment on the positives of the pandemic and the means to perpetuate these? So it's a pretty broad question.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of them. I mean, if you think about from an emotional side, if you've not had been closely related to lives lost, I mean, those are obviously negatives. But positive side, family time, working from home, rethinking about finding purpose.
Yeah, I want to send my kids back to school now. Go back to school. I'm sick of you.
Yeah, that's another great example. My kids, well, everyone's going to be different. My kids love remote working. They're finding it hugely a lot more productive. And so what I hope on the back of this is that you're going to see a huge consensus shift, a huge mentality shift where people are a lot more interested in putting the right funding and structures in for health, for example, finding methods for equality where things are starting to improve, driving things behind purpose, not this profit-driven kind of investor model that that we've been with, because it's much easier to do that, I guess, when we are remote from each other in some ways. We've got less of this kind of horrible. I mean, I used to hate going into work in these big companies and these big corporates, because it always felt like this huge pressure point.
Yeah,
you have to do this, otherwise you're completely worthless. Now there's an opportunity where that changes, that people can start, I think, focusing on things where they can be more positive, more purposeful, trying to create a world of abundance with products and services which are beneficial. And it's not just about the profit motive on the investor side. It's actually going back to the principles where the whole company structure started, to solve problems for society and use a monetary mechanism to incentivize that.
I think a powerful driver and movement that's come out of this is also empathy. And I think that empathy is emanating from the consumer. So like if we just look at how they're consuming, say, locally, there's a lot more drive, because now you understand the real pressure that a bottle store's under, or your meat supplier, or your local bakery, and I really do think bringing a bit of empathy in, instead of this cold transaction that we've established between each other, will go a long way to reestablish some really interesting networks. And I just keep thinking stuff like, I've gotten to know my bottle store owner. I've gotten to know my
This is a very South African context.
Yes,
no, really, like I've probably gotten to know them, and I'm chatting to them. Before it was like, hi, Stuart, how you doing, bud? Like, cool. Now, like, chatting to him and thinking about his business, and some orders have gone wrong, for instance, and I'm like, that's awesome. No worries, bud. Whenever you need it. Listen, tell you what, I'll pay for it, because also I want him to be around. I want our business to be around. So I think that empathy is starting on the consumer front, but I'm also starting to see the empathy in business. And like I think about some of our customers. I mean, we're dealing with large organizations, and the conversations we're having with these guys, even though we're small, it's empathy on both sides. It's no longer about the deal to see who can get the bigger win. It's about the deal to help both businesses survive and excel out of this.
Yeah.
as someone who spends their lives structuring deals, I'm loving it. I mean, I'm like
Yeah.
you, both of you. I'm a bit of an idealist. I always want a win-win, and I want the best for everyone, but that never really happens. And what I'm seeing is, either we're coming to the party to help an airline, for instance, with cash flow, or we've got one of our banks who are coming to the party to help us with our cash flow. And there's
Yeah.
been, it's a different decision making. So you're seeing this, for me, the big thing out of COVID and the financial situation. I think that where we are with our finances globally and economies would have been triggered by a number of those black swans.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to happen. I think we're all in agreement. We need it. There's going to be this kind of reset, and COVID seems to be one of the driving forces. But I think as humans, the best part is that we're going to amplify that empathy for each other.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why there's these explosions, right? We're feeling incredibly empathetic towards each other.
Yeah, look, a good crisis comes along, and humans are a funny old species. We fight during the periods where things are relatively stable, and then things go belly up. And this is a very bad example of that. It's amazing how we pull together across borders, nations, and try to just actually help each other. And there's some phenomenal examples of some, amazing people doing amazing things. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a majority of people doing amazing things at every level.
Yeah, there are. I quite agree. And on that majority level?
And then there's a whole lot of people who are not doing amazing things and taking advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
Anyway, call it out. Pick what you want as an example.
But they're going to get their comeuppance, right? I mean, here's an example of a company. Putting it in a company perspective, this is a real moment for them to find purpose, but actually going to benefit their brand. So if you're looking at companies that are doing the wrong thing, take Disney. I mean, what was that all about? We're going to go and furlough 100,000 staff. Meanwhile, we're going to go and pay our dividend out to our shareholders. We're going to give our senior leadership team massive bonuses. Ridiculous. Completely and utterly ridiculous. I mean, I do not want to touch Disney. I've got really, don't know how it's going to go about the kids wanting to go to a sort of Disneyland or watching the Disney program, but I just don't want to be associated with that brand. Lego, on the other hand, they say we're going to try to go and make much of our content free to give you stuff.
Say, go to Legoland.
Yeah. So who do I want to go and so the banks that are doing the right things versus those that are doing the wrong things, I know which one I want to go and pick. And the same across all sectors. Nike have nailed it again with the way that they've got into the hashtag BLM sort of movement in terms of pursuing that and supporting the Kneel movement and everything else that goes with it. Adidas
Have they?
Far behind.
Have they really?
What I've seen. Why have you seen?
No. Well, it depends on your perspective, though. That's what I'm saying here. Is you're looking at this and saying you're seeing, and it's polarizing because actually I have seen the other side of this on Nike, because the vast majority of their customer base is outside of the States, and when they did the Copernic deal, it was incredibly successful for them. But jumping onto this Black Lives Matter is a completely different thing. And they've polarized to far extreme because, when Copernic got down on his knee, it was a very different debate because this Black Lives Matter is a very, very different radicalization of what's actually happening and the extension to what it's gone. So I'm not sure I'd agree with you on that. I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into the politics of that debate. But,
so look, so if I was a company, I would say I would prefer to go and have a target market. What is the saying? If you try to please everyone, you're going to end up pleasing no one.
Quite agree.
And I think what Nike is doing is 100% right, because if you fall outside of that and you don't support what Nike are doing, I think Nike should be quite comfortable in saying we don't care.
100%.
Because you are no longer in our market, and that's why
quite correct.
Whether or not it leads to more or less profit isn't necessarily the thing here. It's their brand and their driving with that sort of, adding it to their purpose, if you want.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So yes, it was
quite agree.
And using it to market an opportunity.
I quite agree.
I think there's substance, that sits underneath it. But most companies I'm seeing are either it's just platitudes. Yes, we've got to go and get behind it. Actually doing nothing active to go and support it at all, which I think they're starting to go and get held up on.
And they should.
The other set
And
are
they
actually
should.
just doing nothing at all, right? Because it doesn't, they can't compute it in their kind of like the goals that they've set, because they don't have an underlying purpose that they're driving for. I mean, another great example was Ben and Jerry's. So Ben and Jerry's is part of Unilever.
Yes.
Right? Now, Unilever is a very purposeful organization. Anyone wants to work for Unilever. You know, make sustainable living commonplace. Try to uplift living standards for 1 billion people. They are driven by sustainability, and this has continued after Paulson into I forget his name, their new CEO. You're seeing it. But Ben and Jerry's have able to make a very controversial statement on their site, which most other brand managers and fast-moving they would never allow. But they've said, this is fine. This is working within our underlying purpose. You just go for it. And so I love seeing these examples, because I think those organizations who firstly invest in innovation or new products and services and develop and try to pivot, they've got a massive advantage. But the other set of organizations, even if they don't do much, who just really drive through that they are genuinely there to solve some sort of purpose, even altruistically, they get a huge advantage, because the brand goodwill that they get is just absolutely massive. And the organizations that are doing neither or both poorly, they're just in such trouble on top of this. And to be honest, that's a good thing. Good riddance.
I really don't disagree. I really don't disagree. I would just actually caveat those that are doing nothing may be doing something, because the target market is the opposite to what you're describing there. But if they've got that as their underlying purpose, then 100%, because they're doing what their purpose demands from them. And I quite agree, because you know what, it is a polarized world. There's a left and there's a right. So it's an interesting debate. So Brett, any final questions from you, Fat Boy, before we start wrapping up?
I do. I mean, this is, I think it's probably the most important part that we haven't covered, is how is Colin Iles doing during a cigarette ban?
Hey, well, this is a private conversation, right? That no one's watching.
No one's watching. Oh no, everyone's just stopped watching. As Brett said that, the numbers just went zoom.
Look, I tell you, how I'm doing is ups and downs, but I've got to say it is a ridiculous decision.
Yeah,
it is a ridiculous decision. I mean, I don't tend to be particularly political and share these sorts of opinions in the main on public platforms, but this is a genuinely ridiculous decision. I think we're one of 2 countries in the world that have banned tobacco, and on the data that's there are so many things that could have been done which would have been impactful. And I think, again, from a government perspective, like at the corporate leadership level, this is the moment to buid trust with your voters. And I know South Africa is a very, very different structure. There's no really obvious competing party that's challenge the ANC over the next couple of years. But nonetheless, if you want to lead and support, well, basically work for your community, work for your citizens, you've got to build trust.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this particular example was necessarily the one that they should have batted on and stuck to, because it doesn't make any particular sense versus some of the other things they could have done to really help the population.
Well, I agree. I think trust could be, and the focus on trust, probably the most positive outcome of COVID, as people start to realize the power of it.
Yeah.
A lot of what we've spoken about today hinges around trust within the organization, trust outside the organization, trust between consumers. That's very powerful. Thank you.
Totally. So now, Colin, where can people find you?
So a couple of places. I don't think they want to find me. What I'd really prefer that they go and look at is the community site that I've set up called Purposeful Organisations.
Yes.
Cool. Nice.
That would be absolutely awesome. You can search for it, obviously, on Google with either a Z or an S, because I've taken both domains. But the idea behind Purposeful Organisations is to get together a community of leaders who really are interested or already are and sharing how they've done it to put purpose at the centre of their business strategies, and to go and actually have a curated place where you can go and share information and actually build up a bit of support for it, because it's so powerful. It works at most of the companies that introduce it. They definitely get a big advantage. And I really want to go and start driving that through as a really good conversation with as many people as possible about how to go and make that pivot from being profit driven solely, no matter what you have asked your marketing team to pretend otherwise, to actually get something where purpose is front and center about the whole model of your corporate or your business or whatever organization that you're running, your NGO or even your government.
Beautiful.
But hold on, what I don't understand is purpose doesn't have a Z in it.
Yes.
Organizations, I don't.
No, Brett didn't pass matric.
No, he didn't. It was very good, Brett. What I really need is for someone to come up with a good acronym for it, because it's a bit mouthy. Purposeful organisations. The short I've got, which that doesn't sound particularly positive. So if someone can manipulate purposeful organisations into something which sounds a bit more, cool and googly, then please let me know.
Purpose. On that defamatory note.
I think it's time.
It is. Guys, thank you so much for the time, and for those who've spent the last 50 minutes with us, thank you for actually bearing with us. And we look forward to next week's chat.
We're not chatting next week.
No. We'll find someone else, Colin.
This is where Mike looks to me and says, and the topic is?
Well, I think the 7 people that have dialed in, they give them let them choose, and then you can try to hunt the person to talk to it.
No, exactly.
You know what? It's quite a good theme. We set a goal. We said that we need to double our viewers this time, and we have.
We have.
We've got 7.
In fact, we quadrupled. We quadrupled.
Hey, we 3 don't count, right?
No, we leave those. Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm looking at the numbers. The stats are flying through the roof. So sorry, guys, we're boring the shit out of you now. So thank you very much for joining us. Brett, Colin, as always, lovely to chat. And you know what I am looking forward to more than anything else is when we can actually sit in the hot sun and have a cold beer and actually go cheers and chink our glasses. I look forward to that time. I really
Me
do.
too.
Yeah. Awesome.
Stay safe.
Thanks, guys.
Stay safe, everyone.
Rob, we're not entertaining. It's just Brett who's just permanently a monkey. But anyway, let me not say that because then I'm going to get into trouble. Oh, I didn't hit finish. Let me hit finish.
Seriously chucking that in while I have no chance to respond.
No, I'm in the broadcast now. Oh, no.